Hi, this is Mersenneary, and today's topic is bankroll management for super turbos, but this can also be applied to all forms of heads-up sit and go poker. People ask me a lot about how many buy-ins you need for STs, and I generally tell them to do one of two things. The first one is to start with 100 buy-ins. That's a pretty simple general piece of advice. You'll be able to weather most downswings if you're a winning player with this bankroll, although there's still going to be a risk of ruin. I've had a 100 buy-in downswing of all in luck before, and you're never 100% safe no matter what bankroll size you pick. But still, 100 buy-ins is going to make the chances of getting totally annihilated pretty dang low. But the second strategy, and I think the better strategy, is to start with about 50 buy-ins, but always make sure you have at least 35 buy-ins at your stake. If you get below 35 buy-ins at whatever level you're playing at, move down. If you have enough for 40 buy-ins at the next highest stake up, then move up. But moving down, of course, is going to be the hardest part for most people. It goes against human nature, I think, once you lose 15 buy-ins, to make it more difficult for yourself to winning that money back, instead of trying to move up, in fact, and trying to make that money back quickly by martingaling. Even smart people will generally just try to stay at the stakes they're at and get the money back, rather than dropping down to a lower stake and making it so that they need to make 25 buy-ins back just to get back to their starting point. Additionally, there are other psychological pressures to not move down and consider yourself a reg at a certain level and not at the level below. For example, if you're a hundreds guy, you might want to think of yourself as a hundreds guy and not one of those lowly $50 amateurs. But if you can get past those thoughts, those fears both of moving down and of moving up, I know plenty of people who have fears of moving up, I think you'll realize that the dynamic bankroll strategy is a much better one for your prospects as a poker player. The first bankroll strategy is definitely the simpler one, and that's why I just say it sometimes. Here, 100 buy-ins, that's what you need, go, go, go. But the second bankroll strategy is actually much more mathematically sound, and let me explain why. First of all, it actually has a very similar risk of ruin, which I define as, in a kind of a practical way, as losing 90% of your bankroll or more. Because obviously if you keep moving down and down and down in stakes, it's very hard to actually get to zero. But since there's no real difference between $0 and like $80 in your account if you're playing the hundreds, then we define it a little bit more practically as losing 90% of your bankroll or more. And if you're using the strategy of constantly moving down and moving up, depending on how many buy-ins you have in your account, and doing this very aggressively, you actually don't have that big of a risk of ruin, even if you're only starting with 50 buy-ins. Secondly, despite the fact that it doesn't have that much additional risk of busto, it's actually a very aggressive bankroll strategy where you can move up in limits quickly and make a lot of money fast if you're in fact a winner at the games. So let's take a look at a quick example. For example, let's say I'm a player who wants to play the 35s with like a $50 bankroll, or $1,750. So if he has a 45 buy-in downswing without being willing to move down, then he's left with only $175, which is basically busto. But if you use this method too, he has about $800 left, despite this really brutal stretch, which is plenty of room still to grind. And if good times happen, and he has the boom switch instead of the doom switch, and has a 75 buy-in upswing, his profit is actually more than double if he's using the guidelines of the second method instead of staying pat at the 35s. So yeah, basically bigger heaters and smaller downswings. What else could you want really from a bankroll plan? Obviously this is a little bit more simple. There's some dynamics that I'm not explaining completely, and always feel free to talk about this if you want to make a comment in the forums. But if you can learn to both be aggressive when your bankroll is growing, and when his bankroll is growing, that's when it's able to take on more risk, and you can move down when your bankroll is shrinking, you both have a low risk of going busto and a great opportunity to break into higher and higher stakes if you have what it takes there. If you're interested in more information, Google expected growth, and if you really like to get into the math of it, you can also Google Kelly criterion if you're not familiar with that phrase already. But at the very least, just remember that moving fluidly up and down the limits, no matter how difficult it is psychologically, is the best way to grow your bankroll aggressively and protect it when the doom switch hits. And I really suggest, now that you know this information, a lot of people know this intuitively, but still stay at the same levels all the time. This is a big recommendation of mine, mathematics-wise. Put it into action and see what happens if you move up when you have a good stretch, or if you move down when you have a bad stretch. I think you'll like the results.